Okay, well, thanks for joining us. We're East 17, and on the day that girls allowed us splitting up, I'd just like to say that we're getting back together. No, it does look like some kind of boy band press conference stage or something, but no, we're here to talk about the API economy. My name's Martyn Bryant. I'm managing editor at The Next Web, and before we kick off, just want to gauge the room. Stick your hand up if you know what an API is.
Awesome, we can go home.
Yes. Excellent. Let's talk really technical. Yeah, okay, so I'm joined by two people who know a lot about APIs and have done a lot of work around the business of APIs, which is it's great to have them here. So it'd be great if you could both very briefly introduce yourselves. Martyn.
Hello, I'm Martyn Davies. I'm a developer evangelist at a company in the US called SendGrid. It's an email deliverability company, and APIs are our business. If you're going to send mail using our platform, you have to do it via the API. Without developers, we are nothing. Humbling. And yeah, I've been working with APIs and developing with APIs for a long time. Before I was at SendGrid, I ran a company called 6.2 that built a couple of things that were predominantly based on top of APIs, and some of them have sort of fallen by the wayside because of changes to APIs and changes to terms of service. And some of them are still running but are heavily dependent on those APIs, so there could be problems with them in the future. And we'll take a look at some of those in a minute, but I will let Stewart do his intro first.
Good afternoon, everybody. It's great to be back in Manchester. Now the boy band's back together. So I work for a company called Zendesk, who's a help desk SaaS provider. I manage our partners, our business development partners as well, so integration and APIs dependent to build those services out. Previously, I used to work for a company called DataSift, who resold Twitter's Firehose and other social data reliant on APIs. And before that, for my sins, 12 years at Oracle and Sun, working with ISVs around APIs and pain points and technicalities. But please do not ask me any questions around Unix Solaris anymore, because my administration skills are pants and have gone to pot ever since then.
Okay, so to set the scene, Martyn has prepared some slides, so take it away.
Yeah, I just wanted to talk about a couple of things that I built on top of APIs, just to give you some examples of the kind of usage stuff. So it's a little bright in here, but if you look at the screens either to the side at the back or this one here, this is a product that I made sort of towards the start of last year called Tour Scrapbook. And it was very simple in concept in that it was a way of letting bands grab everything that people were saying about them on Twitter, and every photo that was taken at every gig, every video that was shot at every gig, and then post it out to Twitter and grab all of that stuff and pull it into one place and kind of store it in perpetuity like a scrapbook. So what we designed was this simple kind of map-based interface, which uses the Songkick API to grab all of the dates that a particular band are going to go and do over a particular tour, and then apply a specific hashtag to each one of those. So if that hashtag gets used by anyone at that gig when they write a tweet about it, post something that's got a bit of video in it, post a picture in it, we could go out and grab that and match it up with that particular, with that date, and then show it in that little box on the left-hand side there, and give you a way to go through and sort of see everything from the fan's point of view. So that was all good. We did it for a couple of artists, and it worked very, very well. And then Twitter changed their terms of service. And that kind of hit me specifically, because one of the things they said you couldn't do was store tweets and then redistribute them, which was kind of the core of what we had built. Now, they didn't actually pull it down, but this still being in existence, and it is still there now, is kind of breaking the terms of service. But luckily, I don't think it gets a lot of traffic, so it's not something that's kind of really up on their radar. But, you know, I had plans to kind of take this and make it bigger and build it into a sort of self-serve platform that you could just sign up for and start using. And that's kind of gone out the window now, because once that starts to scale, if you've got sort of, 100,000 people starting to use it, that's a lot of the real-time traffic coming out of Twitter that you need to be looking at, because we're looking for specific hashtags, so we need to monitor everything that's going through. We basically killed it, dead. So now I just have pictures of it, and I look at them occasionally and shed some tiny tears. For the product that could have been, I thought it was a good idea. I was hoping that it was going to go somewhere, but unfortunately, there's one of the big downsides of building something that's very dependent on one particular platform, and more specifically one particular API. So that didn't go so well. But I'll show you something else now. Do I need to point this clicker at anything particular, or just wave it around? Yeah, cool. Okay, so this is something else that I built for Universal Music Group. Now, this is kind of like an innovative product for the music industry, because this is artist pages for every artist on the UK repertoire across the 5 major labels that make up Universal Music Group. It's a really cool product because pretty much everything that powers these pages comes from APIs. Now, obviously, there are probably going to be downsides to that in the future, but for the minute, it's all good. I'm going to show you just on here, if you look at the elements that come up in red, they are the bits that are powered by external API services. That's the top of the page, that's 4 things. That is as well, that is as well. So is that, and that as well. So everything pretty much about that page comes from external services. This makes a ton of calls out to a bunch of different APIs. Now, it doesn't break the terms of service on any of them, but should any of those TOS change, and should any of the schema that come back from any of those APIs change, then one or many more of these sections could just disappear. But it wouldn't break anything, but they just wouldn't appear anymore. So there's a massive level of dependency there. And obviously, if it's bad when you're working with 1, it's going to be much worse when you're working with 12. So that's another example. But, you know, it's still there now, and it works very well. So no terms of service have been changed, and the usage of Twitter in there seems to be fine as well, just to redisplay tweets. And then I just wanted to talk a little bit quickly about a heavily API-dependent event that I work on called Music Hack Day, which happens around the world now. Roughly 1 event per month somewhere in the world, and the basis of this is that developers come together to build things on top of APIs. This started back in 2009 because there was a ton of APIs that were out there from music content services and other sets of interesting data that were available and open, and people could pick them up and do stuff with them. But the music industry didn't care, and the music industry didn't really know about that sort of stuff. So we started this to kind of bring those 2 worlds together. And this was from the London event last year. And we had all of those companies and their APIs come down to support and demo their stuff and had people building on them. But I wanted to just point out a particular example. So of that list, the majority of those services are providing content, and only a few of them are providing an actual service. Now, the service level APIs are probably fine to be working with because they need developers to use those services, otherwise they're not going to go anywhere. So in particular, SendGrid and Twilio, who are listed up there as the services, they need developers, otherwise their business doesn't exist. That's what they're there to do, is to support the developers and allow them to do something that would essentially take a long time for them to build if they were going to build it themselves. In this case, email infrastructure in SendGrid's case, and kind of telephony infrastructure in Twilio's case. Those are really hard problems to solve, and they're solved by those companies and then given away in API form, which obviously you pay for. That's the business model for those 2. But everyone else is a kind of a content service, right? So you've got, 7 Digital, a music service, Deezer, a streaming music service. OpenEMI is sandboxed content from EMI, but they need developers in which to actually take that and build new things on top of it, but it's very restricted by the terms of service that they have. Songkick, again, information about gigs, SoundCloud, audio, all of this stuff is content-based, which means that someone owns it, and if that owner decides they want to change something about it, then they can start pulling stuff out of these very, very quickly. So this is a couple of examples of stuff that I wanted to point out, just so we know the kinds of APIs that we're talking about, and particularly because I think we're going to get very much into a discussion around why service APIs are good and probably will be fine to work with, and why content APIs could prove problematic down the line. Okay, that's it. That's it for me and my slides. Thank you, sir.
Okay, fantastic. Okay, yeah, so you brought up a very good point there about content APIs versus service APIs. And I think for most people, the idea of a content-based API and what you could do with it really was brought to the fore probably about maybe 6 years ago, something like that, maybe 7 years ago, around kind of the late part of, the mid to late part of the last decade, when there seemed to be a golden age of mashups. And a whole, every day they'd be like, oh, look at this amazing new way of adding, I don't know, Flickr photos to a Google map, or, you know, that's very simple, but, you know, then all sorts of really interesting, creative things came out of that. Stewart, what's your memory of that time?
Quite blurry. It was a frantic time, I think, if I remember from that sort of aspect. And I was actually doing a master's about 3 or 4 years ago, where mashups were on the agenda for learning. It's like, well, I think we missed the boat there, to be honest. This was like 5 or 6 years ago. But what we saw was a convergence of content and bringing siloed data out and converging it together to actually produce interesting data. So my background is around data as well, so I'll mix that in with the whole API aspect. But people didn't really sort of look at them from my context anyways as a business. I think it was more, how do we share that content? How do we make interesting pieces of content brought together? So geolocation, maps with a photo, really great, pictures of cats, let's bring that together as well. But I didn't actually see that as being driven from a business side of things. I think that actually started to happen a couple of years later on. I think it was more, let's have some hack days, let's do mashups together, this is really exciting, but we don't know where it's going.
Yeah, I think there was a promise, wasn't there, of that time.
It was a heady time.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, back then it was fun, right? People were creating stuff that wasn't out there that they felt that there was a need for, and it was, you know, one of the best ways to kind of create anything is to be, you know, a bit selfish about it and kind of scratch your own itch. And what the openness of particular APIs around that time did was allow people to build something that they felt that they needed without having to ask permission from any of the people involved. They could just go, right, this doesn't exist, but I need it, so I'm going to build it. You know, and that was a great time. I mean, you know, cats on a map.
It rocks, I'm telling you.
I almost wish we could go back to those times. Cats on a map. They were simple times. But yeah, so yeah, and around that time there was lots of enthusiasm about the potential of APIs and how this could, how people could build exciting businesses on the back of APIs and build their growth strategies around it. And Twitter was always hailed as this great example of a company that was growing through its API. And it does seem a bit like it's kind of gone the other way now. Stewart, you've had experience of working kind of with Twitter data. Can you tell us a bit about how Twitter's approach to third-party developers has changed?
Yeah, so let's have a hands up. Who out there has built a business on top of Twitter or an API? Good, okay, so I'm not going to upset anybody now. So essentially Twitter based its whole ecosystem and growth on developers and API. So third-party products were built to extend out the virility of the product itself. And that's how it grew and accelerated. So South by Southwest, it came out, it's great, it's exciting. And everybody thought, well, that's fantastic, 140 characters, what am I going to do with that? It's pretty boring. Third-party apps came out, API was opened up, and people saw this as not generally as a business, but some fun initially. The API was open, it wasn't rate limited, standard sort of thing. Then as the acceleration and growth of the organization, users came on board, the API had to be lock back, and they gave some throttle access to it. But you could generally get access to it. And this happened for about 3 or 4 years as the company grew. It was fantastic. And then up until recently, they've made some major changes around display guidelines, developer access, OAuth, essentially locking the API down and locking out the developer community and saying to them, you can't do what you're doing anymore, having purchased TweetDeck and other companies as well. What this actually meant is third-party products that were built on top of an API suddenly had the business cut from underneath their feet. And you know, being open, Twitter were open about this and said for 12 to 18 months, this will happen, it will happen, it is coming. People were blindsided by it, whatever statement they make, but it was coming, it was going to be told about. But looking at that access, that Twitter data itself, so there was third-party write access to that as well. So companies like DataSift, GNIP, bought licenses to purchase that data direct and get access to the fire hose, whereas developers couldn't, they always had a rate-limited access to it. But what you saw was businesses overnight that were stagnated and couldn't do anything. They had to shut down. There was no benefit to them actually accessing the API and providing that service anymore. So suddenly you've got a third-party, you know, we've got this third-party economy going on at the moment. I think what we're going to see is that that's going to, well, people can make decisions and not go, my personal opinion is not go down that route. We're going into a pyramid selling type mode again, where maybe the API economy is dead, long live the API economy. Because what was happening was you'd have Twitter as a provider, a developer would build a product, he'd sell that product, he'd make revenue from it, but the API company would not see that revenue. They wouldn't see the love from it, because they're providing the content, not the value add. But then you've got a complexity where you've got other providers who buy that data. So you've got Twitter, provider that sits on top, and then another organization that builds its products on top of that. So you've got three tiers now involved and dependent on an API product. That to me is a house of cards. That's if you're an investor, think of it from an investor aspect. I'm going to put $1 million into this business and see it grow. I'm going to exit. I'm going to make lots of money. But actually, what I'm betting on is that in this pyramid selling model, this company at the bottom, this API provider, is still going to be around when I exit, or it's going to keep its terms of service there. Because if it doesn't, we've got a serious problem. My $1 million, I'm never going to recoup because I have no business. And again, just I'm seeing from my aspect, I'm seeing a turnaround, a safety economy, and that heyday of mashups and fun and that growth is starting to come back again. I think more. SendGrid, the sort of service provider type of APIs, that's where we should be looking to, because their businesses are dependent on that to actually grow their economy, not the content. Look at LinkedIn and looked at LinkedIn and Google Plus. Their API growth patterns are around working with vendors that provide content back into them. That's all it's about. So Google Plus API opened up will be, I want content to come out of Google Plus, so I can take it out of Pages. I can't do a lot with it. But actually what Google Plus want is the content to be pushed back into the platform, so that they've got content farms producing that to help them grow and accelerate. And the same for LinkedIn as well. That's what their APIs are based about. That's my little rant for the start.
So, Martyn, do you think it's a case of the API economy growing up?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, a few years ago, there was the more fun openness kind of stuff. It's very childlike in that sense, right? So, the level of experimentation was that of a young child kind of learning about stuff and picking up the colourful blocks and kind of putting them in the correct holes and figuring out the best way to do all of this stuff. And that's what a lot of companies were doing, was working with these APIs, trying to figure out what the best fit for it was within inside their business. But as with everything, as with growing up, you don't see, what's further down the line, what changes can happen, what things are going to divert you off down a different path. And that's just where we are right now is, we're kind of 7 to 10 years into this. It's like the API economy is heading into its teenage years. And, everyone remembers their teenage years. They were vastly different from the first 10 years of your life. And, there will be, in the 20s as well. So, it's going to be a constant level of evolution and change. And to not be prepared for that is going to be problematic for people. But no one could have seen the way that it was going to go because it was too difficult to predict it. But now there's been a little bit of knowledge. There's been 7 to 10 years worth of that. I think it's going to be easier to see down the line what changes could potentially be made so APIs, when you're using them, and what kind of pitfalls are going to be there. And I think generally people are going to be far more cautious, as Stewart said, particularly from an investment point of view. If your backbone is one particular service that could change at any minute, the level of financing that you're going to get for your idea is going to be significantly less, if any at all. And certainly, the type of deals that are in place before those kind of financing structures put in place are going to be looked at quite heavily, which I think, from an angel and sort of seed round point of view is going to make things a little bit more difficult.
Do you think there's been a case of, obviously, the general business around APIs has been growing up, but some of the companies at the heart of this, I'm thinking mainly Facebook and Twitter, who have been very popular for third-party developers developing all sorts of apps around them. Yes, Facebook and Twitter, they maybe have to grow up and change the way that they treat their APIs, but some of their treatment of third-party developers has sucked, hasn't it?
No, I'm not going to name any names, but yes.
It's not been the best PR, I think, for them at all, has it? And generally, it's been done in a very pragmatic... I think you know, as you say, Martyn, as the companies have grown up, they've gone into a maturity mode and brought in management that have been matured and gone, no more. This is how it's going to be. We're a corporate entity now. So developers, great, you've helped accelerate the company. But actually, the value to us is nothing as such. So it's interesting, you know, Salesforce's model is around API access. Customers pay for that. They pay for that as part of their license. And they pay for that access, and there's terms of services around that and quality of service. But they've then built the whole ecosystem around that and have service partners that build applications. But they know they're dependent on Salesforce, and that's fine. That's a similar model to Twitter and developers. But there's a revenue stream in there, and that revenue stream guarantees that. And I think, you know, that's the maturity that we're seeing as the API economy moves forward more into that enterprise space than, unfortunately, the fund space.
I mean, yeah, if you're paying for access to an API, then there's a level of expectation around what terms you're actually paying for them to meet, right? I mean, there's like companies like SendGrid, you know, people pay us for use of our service after a certain point, and, you know, we're not going to roll in there and make changes without, you know, some serious considerations, because that just wouldn't work right for us. I think as soon as money changes hands, things get very different. When it's all open and free and, you know, kind of all fluffy and, you know, do what you want with it, there's always going to be that problem, because at the end of the day, you know, it's free. You know, you're not paying for it. If people want to make a change to it, then, you know, they're very much within their right to do so. It might not sit well with the developers, and it might not be communicated well at all, but it's going to happen, you know, because there's, you know, you have not bought a slice of that, so you don't get to tell them what to do.
I mean, it's interesting with Facebook Garage. So I used to host it for a couple of years, and then it grew and matured, and it went really large, and then Facebook turned around and said, you can't do that anymore. So you can't have an event that's called Facebook Garage, blah-de-blah, lots of people attending it, lots of developers, it's building an ecosystem, we want to take over that. And it's like, you can't support a developer community and then pull the rug from underneath it. It's just bad. And you know, the more companies that do that, I think, you know, the respect that they lose as well. I think, you know, it's not just about the API, it's the respect of the developer community. And, well, I'm actually not going to work with these guys anymore, and fingers burn.
Yeah, and so if we're looking at kind of these APIs and the kind of consumer APIs and consumer-focused, content-focused APIs, do you think that companies might just get rid of them completely? I mean, and just think, well, let's not bother with the third-party developer growth strategy. I'm thinking new companies coming up. I mean, you look at Netflix, for example. It completely switched off its developer program to new entrants recently. So maybe new companies are going to think, let's not bother with that whole third-party developer growth strategy. It's not worth the hassle down the line.
Interesting one. It could be, well, again, I suppose if you look at it from two angles, one is open it up, and then aspect of be open with the developer community and say, we're opening it up for 2 years as we grow, but then respect the fact that we will turn into a corporate entity, or we'll grow and it's going to go away. Or like you say, Martyn, just not open it up at all, but limit your marketplace, or do a 50-50 and open the API up and go to a paid model straight away and go, here's how it is. To sustain that API and give a quality of service, there has to be a revenue commit to there to do the back end stuff. Yeah. And whether that model comes into place. That's the model I'd prefer to see, so it's open but paid.
I think it's very much dependent on what that content is. If you're dealing with a service that's particularly got anything to do with TV, film, or music, the licensing structure behind that content is so complicated and so antiquated still that building technology on top of it that will allow other people to build essentially whatever they like with that becomes very problematic. It was one of the challenges that I faced when I was working for Universal Music, that, you know, just like with the umusic.co.uk site, just exposing certain things, you know, as a data endpoint, as like JSON or XML, was, you know, a bit of a problem. You know, what could be in there? You know, certain identifiers, could they be in there? Was it okay to put that out there? You know, and just like kind of there was an edginess around it, and you know, as these deals, particularly for companies like Spotify and Deezer and Netflix, as they're being structured, you know, the technology side of it, it needs to be there in terms of the consumption side of things, but in terms of the wider, more open consumption, you know, there are so many hurdles that they're going to have to jump over in order to get to that end point that actually it would probably just take too long and would end up holding back the core strategy of the company, which is essentially to get it out there, get people signed up and make some money. So in that sense, you know, if they either go, yes, here's a developer program and then shut it down, it's probably just because it's getting far too complicated for them to handle. And then particularly if they've been in a growth period and then they feel they need to streamline that business a little bit, it's always going to be that little thing on the edge that someone goes, nah, put a cross through that. That costs too much. We don't know what we're doing with it. Get rid of it.
Yeah, I think at this point it'd be good to open it up to everyone here and see if anyone has any input or any questions for the panel. So I think there are some microphones around. So if anyone has anything they'd like to add. Okay, someone down the front.
Thank you very much. I just wondered whether you think that products like Flipboard, which are really heavily funded, are fundamentally flawed because of their reliance on APIs for their content.
I wouldn't say fundamentally flawed, but they are going to have to remain quite rapid in their reaction to changes, because they have already sort of done this already a little bit in that they've started to move a touch away from Twitter, and you know they've got more of kind of the RSS side of things in there as well. And I'm pretty certain at some point they're going to build like a custom curation of like, here's stuff I want to get things from, put in a bunch of feeds, and then you know that's what will be in your Flipboard. But they have already started to move a little bit away from it. So they've seen it, they've spotted it, and they know that they need to react to it. It's not fundamentally flawed, but again, I mean, Flipboard very much came out of it like, hey, wouldn't that be cool? You know, building on top of one particular API, and then as it got big and started to become a legitimate business, that's when the problem started to arise, because, you know, very, very quickly could become a legitimate business with absolutely no content in it. And, yeah, so not fundamentally flawed, but yeah, I mean, there's definitely going to be problems for them, and they'll have to react to that. But, you know, hopefully the funding that they have is going to go towards, you know, building out that platform and making it way less dependent on one particular thing, and a little bit more pluggable in that if one of them drops off, it's not going to kill the service. There'll still be content there, but it doesn't necessarily have to come from that one place.
Yeah. Sorry, I don't want to hug the mic. Just got one more question. I just wondered if you'd come across any businesses that you think have been successful with charging for their APIs.
SendGrid.
Okay.
SendGrid.
Yeah, it does tend to be the service focus.
Yeah, I was going to say always the service APIs.
Yeah.
But again,
what about in the content field? Anyone?
Well, I mean, it's slightly different because it's not necessarily like wide open. But PA, Press Association, they charge for their API access, and obviously that's, you know, it's a big revenue stream for them. They plug into a lot of stuff. I think, you know, the sort of more well known like content stuff, like more general consumer-facing stuff, not so much, but, you know, distribution of content APIs that are paid for do exist, PA being a good one, Getty as well, you know, similarly, because there's plenty of stuff that, you know, there's licensing around those articles and around those photographs, and that distribution needs to happen quickly into a multitude of different platforms, and an API is the only way to do that.
I was going to say, yeah, some of the more old world economies, National Licence Association Press, you know, they've got complexities around their licenses they own, they sell them to clipping services and there's distribution rights. They seem to be more successful, while the new economy seems to forget there's licenses issues around the content and then permutates that through an API and then goes, oops, sorry, we forgot to collect the licensing aspects for that. And I think that also goes back, it's a good question, because that's a crippling factor in some of these younger companies as they mature and expose their APIs. They forget about some of the legal frameworks that have to jump through.
Yeah, there's often the kind of just, let's just get it out there and see how it goes kind of thing.
And you know, hence with Flipboard and display guidelines, display rights, as you move forward with that, yeah, you're going to get crippled by some nice lawyers coming along.
Yeah. Okay. Okay, yeah.
Thanks. Hello, thanks. You mentioned a business model which you kind of described as 50-50, and I didn't quite understand what you meant by that, and I was wondering if you could...
Yeah, so I was talking about sort of share either free API, well, we're basically talking about no API, free API, So a 50-50 model where actually it's a paid model, so you can have a freemium service. So essentially what SendGrid do, they have a freemium service up to a certain point, the API access, and that's great. And then as you hit the threshold, you go into a paid service. So you gain a user base, and then as you grow and mature, you get a paid revenue from that to help support it. And for me, that seems like again, I'm sorry, I don't even work for SendGrid, I'm somewhere else.
Do you want this?
But those sort of models work really well. Whereas like with Twitter or the Facebooks or the LinkedIn, it's either it's a free API, but you've got rules and boundaries, or you go to a commercial model, but then you've got limited access because they'll only grant so many licenses.
Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, sure, yeah.
Hello, thank you. I just wonder if the term API economy, listening to all of you, is part of the problem, that the fetishization of the API actually masks the fact that people are delivering really valuable services. And rather than talking about the APIs, they should talk about the service a lot more, sell that and say, by the way, the API is the way we deliver it. If this was the postal service, we wouldn't be talking about the envelope economy.
I agree. I think that's going to happen more and more. I think you're right. There was a point where, having the API was almost more important than the company to a lot of people. And like that being there was like the thing that was going to attract everybody in. But, nowadays what you'd prefer to see is, a really great service and then be able to build on top of it, just because they have an API, rather than them spouting the fact they have an API and then you getting into the service or working to build up that service and make that service better by what you build on top. But yeah, I completely agree. I think that, pushing too hard on the kind of the API economy might be a bad thing, but it does feel like it's starting to change at the minute, and that the referencing of it even. I mean, because referencing it to a lot of people doesn't make any sense, right? Like, people don't even really know what it means. But to talk about being able to build on top of a particular service, you can understand that. And I think that's where the sort of the wording of this is probably going to have to go.
It's interesting just because I do work for Zendesk, not SendGrid, and Zendesk has built its platform over the last 12 or 18 months, not talking about an API economy, but integration partners, and going the standard app marketplace. But I love that term, API fetish. That's great. That needs to go out there. But it is that economy of building with partners, integration partners, to help accelerate out your business rather than concentrate on what the API is and the delivery and sort of framework around that as well.
Okay. Anyone else? Yeah.
Oh, who's going to get there first?
Hi, I'm just curious, with search engines making a lot of updates that concern duplication of content, and obviously APIs then distributing content, does that not kind of spell a large proportion of the end of content-driven APIs? Or is that a bit of a misinterpretation of what you can do with them?
Let me just make sure I understand the question.
I'll rephrase that.
Okay.
So you can get penalised or in trouble for duplicating content, and if you use an API which draws content from elsewhere, your website becomes somewhat in the limelight for the wrong reasons. So does this not mean that a lot of the techniques that a content-driven API uses becomes defunct, or makes that website a target for, say, Google or Bing or Yahoo?
So I'm just mapping it out in my head. So in terms of, so I'm just thinking of a little business idea that I had. I'll spell it out for everybody. You won't make millions, honestly. It's around pulling content around big data. So essentially multiple content sources coming together, and you will get replicated content from pulling those from APIs. So you're thinking from a site provider's aspect, they'll pull in content from different providers, it gets replicated, and then Google will penalise you with all the updates around SEO. Yeah. So if I look at that from an abstract way, it's not the API providers or content providers. They're the mechanism to deliver that. It's more the website provider or the web manager who'd have to look at that aspect. Yeah. The content providers are just there there will be duplicated content and just push and promote that out, but give the quickest and fastest mechanism to get it out. So I'd say it's more the web owner that has to think about that contextually rather than the API content farm owners. They're there distributing their content as wide and far as possible.
So does that not mean that the demand for the actual services might drop significantly?
I'd say it probably increase because you want a wide variety of content rather than minimised.
Yeah.
You'd want more content coming through around different variety of subjects.
Okay.
Okay, any other questions? Yeah, okay, front. Yes, down the front, yeah. I think just for the recording, it's best we get a microphone.
Boo. No hard question.
I was actually just curious as to the panel's views on maybe the precedent set by the retreat of Google from RSS support over the last week and how that affects what was actually glue for a lot of APIs across the web. And does it set some precedents for seeing the web as a platform or as a bunch of silos that are actually quite disconnected?
Yeah. I mean, for me, what I found interesting about that was the number of tweets I saw after that was announced. People saying, "Well, you should just pay for it then if you're going to complain about it." The problem is Google never gave anyone a chance to pay for Google Reader. There wasn't a premium option, and it's depressing, really, in a way that something that is, it became. I mean, RSS. It sat on top of RSS, but it made RSS a lot easier to deal with, and a lot easier for third-party developers to create really interesting apps around and things like that. So I think there's a responsibility there that Google has kind of shirked, which is a real shame. And I'm hoping that in the boardroom at Google, there's some serious thought being put into the future of that. I mean, you look at they launched Google Keep yesterday, which is like an Evernote kind of service, not quite as fully featured yet as Evernote, but again, tweets. I've seen tons of tweets from people saying, "I don't know when this is going to shut down. I'm never going to use it." So I think there's a responsibility there that maybe Google is now getting this reputation. How long that'll last, I don't know, but a reputation for not keeping up with the wants and desires of its user base.
Yeah, I was pretty devastated that they killed it, frankly, because I used it a lot and I'd used it for a long time, right? So it's like kind of legacy customer there. I felt an option to pay would have been awesome, but you know, they're a massive company, and if they're going to do something like this, then they can do it. But if the user base is there, then, you know, surely the right way to think about it would be, can we charge people for this? But I'm not sure that it's kind of all the way dead. Google are very good at taking technology, getting rid of it from the public view, and then just rolling it into something else and giving it back in a couple of years' time, going, hey, we made this. So I would expect that there's a possibility that it may continue on as a part of Google Plus, because they seem to be centering a lot of their efforts around that, and they've pulled another couple of products as well that, you know, weren't massive and didn't really have a lot of use as individual products, but as other parts of Google Plus, and kind of bring it all into that one place. I could see that maybe, you know, what I want to read and all of that stuff being a part of that and streamline into that flow would be something that they would do. So I think maybe more it's less them going, right, we're just going to get rid of it because we don't want to support it anymore, and more just trying to redirect the flow of all of those users through to a different product that they want to have a bigger focus on. Yeah,
I agree, definitely. It's you know, Google Plus is a strategy. Carboshing it now is probably sort of mitigating some of the users that are not on Google Plus or accessing it or using it. But inherently, they kill products. But I see them rolling it into something like Google Plus as being that central channel to bring it all together. Thankfully, we don't have to talk about Wave anymore. But Google's really good at that whole sort of killer technology perception, but then mask it into another product in the back end. And probably that's why, well, we're guessing they've not put a charge out. But yeah, I was devastated as well. It makes RSS simple for me.
Well, I guess I'm not too concerned about whether Reader lives or dies, but what it says about support for a very widely adopted standard for a very lightweight API. And does Google's kind of action set a bad precedent elsewhere? Well,
it could, but then any company looking at the reaction to the shutdown of Google Reader would probably think twice about doing it now. I mean, you know, I still think that it's an accepted format, and I still think it's a consumable format for a lot of services. I mean, there's plenty of other things out there that can consume RSS. You know, the big decision you know, yeah, they're a big company, and if they do something, it could set a precedent, absolutely. But I think, you know, depending on what's worth it for a particular content business to have RSS output, if they're seeing a lot of traffic coming their way through that, then they're going to keep it. If they're not, then they're going to kill it. Simple as that.
I think there's a certain amount of disregarding of that, though, within the Silicon Valley boardroom mindset of this is where we're going. These consumers weren't paying. Let's not worry about them, kind of thing. And I think that yes, there will be debates and arguments around this, but at the same time, as we've seen from Facebook recently, starting to arbitrarily just cut off services that it decides are breaking its terms of service, just out of the blue, services that have been running for months or years, suddenly like you're gone, kind of thing. And the same with Twitter, with it's got these API tokens, user tokens that people who have created kind of old school Twitter clients, which they don't want developers to create anymore, and they've reserved the right really to hand out more to people that they like. They haven't done that yet, but they could do. There's a certain arrogance there that we should definitely be worried about, I think, and the Google Reader shutdown definitely demonstrates that. Yeah. Okay. Someone at the back.
I'd just like to ask the panel's opinion on, I don't really know what the name for this is, but basically the notion that Twitter's including adverts alongside the API feed, indistinguishable from other tweets, except for the fact that if you compare what comes from the Twitter client, and I don't know if you saw someone had reverse engineered and compared the two and could spot the adverts by their omission in if they paid for, the Twitter own brand client. So the question is, what do you think of APIs that use paid for content alongside the open data they're providing as a means of generating revenue for to support the API?
That's the kind of the promoted tweets and stuff as well, right? So.
And they've opened up the advert API as well to push them direct.
Fair play, right? They've got to try and make money, right? And if that's one of the ways of doing it, there's still a lot of people sitting on top of that API, so actually forcing advertorial down out into all of those places is a good way of getting the eyes on that they need in order to charge the rates that they charge for those particular adverts. I mean, I think, that looking at the kind of financial model around that sort of stuff, that's one of the reasons why they started acquiring so many of the third-party clients for people writing tweets and actually consuming tweets, is because they had no way of getting those eyes onto any kind of advertorial or any promoted tweets, because there was just no way of getting them in there. They bought a bunch of clients and either shut them down or brought them in-house and made it so that they could appear inside those streams. But obviously, that's probably not been working too well, and still having a bunch of those things out there, they do really want to streamline it down to one client, and it must be our client. And in order to do that with all of the other services that are still using it, they've got to fire out, money makers via the API. So, it's there. I think people are going to be okay with seeing it. I think it's, not massively indistinguishable from other tweets. It's not super offensive in terms of it being in there. I mean, it's essentially just like watching ITV, right? There's going to be ads there, and if you don't want it, then press pause or fast forward on the PVR. Keep scrolling if you don't want to see them. At the end of the day, they've got to make money, and if that's the way that they're choosing to do it, then fair play. But
the thing is, as well, all those Twitter clients were collecting data anyway, so they were the data feeds that were then selling. Well, I'm not saying they were selling it, but had the possibility of selling that data to advertisers to then correlate that data back. But if that helps fund, think of it another aspect, if that helps fund the API for developers and turn it around, that's great. It's just, but Twitter has to make revenue somehow, and that's their chosen choice.
Yeah, I think as long as they're open about it, as long as they're clear about it, then it's their business, isn't it? Yeah. Anyone else? I think that we are probably. I think we've been very depressing in a lot of ways about APIs, haven't we?
It's the end of the
world. It's all doom and gloom. Yeah. Geekageddon or something, but but you know, there's still we look back to that golden age, don't we? But I think that that golden age of mashups, that's still alive in things like Music Hack Day.
Absolutely,
yeah.
absolutely. And you know, there's companies out there that are essentially just built off the back of, you know, taking one thing and mashing it up with another, and still working very, very heavily with APIs. You know, it's not a bleak outlook at all, right? There's still plenty of services, there's still plenty of content services, and there's still plenty of ways of building on top of very, very cool stuff and making very cool stuff, even cooler stuff out of, you know, combining two of those cool things, if not more than two. So yeah, I mean, you know, it's very exciting. I mean, you know, Music Hack Days, you know, being around now at 5 years in, doing, you know, 12 events a year all around the world with all of those partners, and people still being excited about doing it despite us not really having changed the format in that time. You know, it's incredibly exciting. So yeah, as soon as we start to see a drop off in levels of attendance or enthusiasm, then sure, maybe something will have changed. But for right now, it's just as exciting as it once was.
The great thing about these I'll come to you in a moment, Ian. The great thing about these hack days as well, as I see it, is that they're fulfilling a need as well. They're actually serving media, the media industry. So if you look at, for example, there are the Music Hack Day at Medem earlier this year in Cannes, the Music Industry Festival. There was people from the music industry pitching ideas for what kind of hacks they might want to see built. And so it's still that kind of playfulness, but maybe with more of it fitting into business somehow. Yeah,
I think there's still, like you say, there's a playfulness there, but it helps stimulate the creativity as well. So the hack days for me, and even the start of events centred around them, actually stimulate the creativity and the ideas, and the APIs give access to do that. And it may not necessarily lead to a business model, or it may not lead to a business that's generating revenue, but it helps kickstart those off and get things moving. You know, especially like with the Music Hack Days and some of the stuff that around the EMI that we're doing last year around data sets and open data sets and bringing data sets together and merging them through APIs. You know, that's an exciting new world that we're coming across now as data is being opened up, and it's through an API. You can extract that out through OpenGov and US governments and places like that and get bizarre data. You know, creativity around building applications on that is a new world economy as well that's coming through. So, you know, look at the prescription data that's available now. So one of the use cases for that is you can actually see what doctors have been prescribing for drugs, and not that I'd abide by this, but people go out and sell drugs to doctors from GlaxoSmithKline and places like that. And they can correlate that data and build applications on top of those APIs to bring the data out and look at what drugs are being sold to doctors and then go and target those doctors for sales. And probably not the best instance ever, because that's quite hardcore. So it's not doom and gloom, there's opportunities, and maybe just thinking away from some of the standardized content providers and look at some of the open data that's going on out there as well, and think of those APIs as a new world economy to stimulate some of these mashups again and have some fun and not be doomy.
In fact, I believe there's city API work going on in this very building right now. So yeah, good stuff. There's lots of really exciting stuff around open data and open data APIs happening right here in Manchester. Ian, you have a question? Microphone?
Not so much a question, more of a statement. I find, you know, the whole Hack Day thing and mashup thing, it's very cool. You know, but when we originally did Hack Day, the nice thing about it was that there was no real APIs. It was just, here's data, here's a service, hack on it. You know, the hack days I've seen and there's a whole thing about hack days and hackathons and who owns the rights to all that kind of stuff, which I'm not going to even go into, which is very depressing. But I think the problem I got is that it's all very much, here's data, you are allowed to mash it up with this service, or you're allowed to do this much stuff. Where the original idea was, okay, here's a service, do whatever you like with it, you know. And I think all these companies are going, right, you know, hack on our stuff, but don't mess with that, you know. Where the real Hack Days was much more, you can do whatever you like, and I think we've lost that, which is a real shame, which is slightly depressing. Sorry.
No, there is a little bit of a trend now of companies kind of jumping on the whole Me Too bandwagon and seeing running a hack day is like a really great way of getting a weekend's worth of free R&D, which is not the way to approach it at all, right? It should be as loose as Ian said, as just like, go into a room with some stuff and mash it together and have some fun with it and see what comes out of it. Any further restriction than that, and it starts to become like work.
And try and break it.
Yes.
Hack it and break it.
Yeah.
You're right, Ian. That's been lost, hasn't it? That's not there anymore.
Yes,
Yeah.
but that's a whole other panel.
That's
That's a very good point. And this whole kind of like corporate interest in hack days and startups in general is a good thing. It's a good thing, but it needs to be treated in the right way. I saw British Airways announced some kind of hack event on a plane for like a 10-hour flight. And it was announced last night. There was a midnight embargo, and I was just going to sleep, and I just scanned the article, and then saw on Twitter the resulting scorn that was being poured over them for this, which was maybe I don't know, maybe a shame for them. They'd launched this thing. They thought, oh, this is going to be so cool. It needs to be treated with particularly kid gloves, I think. Yeah. Cool. Okay. Oh, question. Yeah. Just wait for the microphone.
Hi. Yeah. Just one last sort of positive point. I mean, we're talking about really big APIs here. We're talking about big companies. We're talking about things that, well, possibly start much smaller and end up really big. But what it has done is, I mean, I write APIs for the University of Manchester on my stuff, and I do that because I know that if I want my services to be used, that's what I have to do, and I find it. I can then sell it, if you like, to my colleagues, and there's thousands of people who work at the university, and it's all within the network of the university, and it's through learning about things like this that you end up doing it on a smaller scale. So there is, that's where positive things come from it. And maybe what we're seeing at the moment is like the early days of TV, where it's all advertising and explosions and lots of people trying to make money and not knowing how. And that's kind of coming to an end now, as what we've been hearing about. But the smaller stuff that comes through, is maybe the positive point of it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Trying to cheer things up at the end.
Positive
nice
end there.
cheery end
Exposing
there.
your services.
Fantastic.
Try to finish with a smile.
Yes. Yeah. Okay, fantastic. Oh, and one more point, Ian. You get the microphone. We'll just let you have one more point, and then we'll wrap up.
I was just going to say, the nice thing about APIs is that obviously it's there from most programming language. It's quite easy to have an API, and actually the core of programming languages has APIs. But I think the focus right now is very much on these massive services that aggregate all this data, where actually the interesting stuff is more like, I have a Fitbit that has an API. That's, to me, is very, very important. And I can do incredible things with that. And that's where the next lot of APIs are.
Yeah. Are you going to launch an API for yourself?
That's a really good idea.
Yeah.
Hey, excellent, fantastic. Right, okay. Let's all go and make self APIs, and we can hack each other. Yeah. Okay. Fantastic. Well, thanks a lot. I'd like to thank the panel. It was more like a chat really than a panel. It's good. Martyn Davies from SendGrid and Stewart Townsend from Zendesk. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thanks.